the week 17 element of these tournaments. You have some nice correlations in this. You have the stacks in it as well. I mentioned earlier the Debo and Trey Lance stack that you have in this here roster, and then there is some correlations as well with week 17. So how much emphasis are you putting into both stacking this year and that week 17 element, or the playoff run in general for these teams?
For me, I think the puzzle is that we want to target situations where those stacks are not costing us extra, where we like those players in a vacuum, where we think that they are going to help us first and foremost with playoff advance. You can approach it from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to draft well. I'm going to get a lot of teams sort of into the playoffs, and a few of those teams will make week 17. And then I need to have the best week 17 team. So instead of finishing last out of the group of teams that make it, I finish first, or I finish in the top 5. I put myself in the big money. You can't necessarily control any of these things. There's going to be a huge amount of luck that goes into it. But if you could do things to increase your chances to advance to the finals and then to have unique teams in the finals, then that would be, I think, still a much bigger advantage than having certainly some of the highest profile stacks that you would expect to be at least moderately duplicated in that group that's in the finals. So if you have players where you believe that the stacks or the correlations are not being bid up because they're so fun to play, or they're so, I won't say obvious, but they're plays that seem like very good plays, and therefore you're having the ADPs actually creep up. And then the value that you're getting on the player in the first place when you're looking at the original advance becomes a lot worse. I think that's where you want to do it. So if you have some of these, like, I mean, I think the Detroit-Chicago one is kind of a fun one, because I think you're still going to get good prices on those players. I think that the concerns about Deebo Samuel put him in a situation where you can still get him, and then at this point you can still get Trey Lance. I don't know if that's going to be the case later on. And one of my biggest hopes for the 2022 offseason is that Lance continues to kind of be in this range where we don't know what he's going to be. And then you can get him in a lot of leagues. And if he plays well, then you win those leagues. And if he plays poorly, then all the leagues you don't have, you're more focusing on. If he plays extremely well and it becomes very clear that he's going to be the starter and have a huge number of rushing attempts, and his price pushes up a couple rounds, then again, we're in a situation where it's going to be hard to outperform that. You're up into that range where there are other good quarterback options, and the opportunity cost just becomes a lot more significant. A similar type of thing with Justin Fields. We had some report come out within the last 48 hours talking about how his mechanics had improved. His release was quicker. Will those things actually play out on the NFL field? In a similar way to kind of best shape of his life, some of the things like that, I mean, they're difficult, right? It's one of the reasons why when you look at collegiate production, that production translates, because it's just very difficult to make a player something completely different at the NFL layer. It's not to say that doesn't happen, but we want to just, make sure we keep an appropriate amount of skepticism in the back of our head about that. But if you can mix in some of these plays without damaging the rest of your team from a value perspective, then it does give you some chances to then have a unique and high upside type of play. When we think back to our situation last year with our team and how we had Joe Burrow and we almost overcame some Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase teams, then, passing one of them, not quite passing Connor's team. Listeners will be familiar with that. But the other kind of big move there is that we had Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, and we made that selection because both players in a vacuum were at an ADP that we really liked. That paid off for us because then not that long after that, Aaron Rodgers becomes, more open about the fact that he actually is going to play for the Green Bay Packers. So you want to take advantage of some of those opportunities throughout the course of the offseason. If you've read Michael Dooner's fantastic work, you know that there are better times to draft and sometimes that are not as strong. But there are going to be times throughout the course of the offseason where you can take advantage of different individual bubbles. So when you are drafting, you want to take advantage of those. One of the things that is important to note there is that Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams had that massive game in week 17, but Aaron Rodgers was not even the quarterback that we used because we had Joe Burrow. At the same time, the Adams-Rodgers combination did help us earlier on because we had to advance through 3 rounds just to get to the finals. And so there are going to be different times and places where that might come into play. If you can get some potentially less expensive week 16 stacks to get you into the finals, where then you can really unleash the full power of this elite team that you've drafted. Because if you're in the finals of this underdog tournament, your team is going to be very, very good, right? You can unleash that if you make it. And so maybe target some of these stacks and correlations that aren't being played to the point where, number one, they're going to have some duplications, and number two, they're driving up ADP.